overview and scrutiny committee meeting. Just a couple of housekeeping. We're not expecting any kind of evacuation or alarm, but if there is, please follow a member of staff who has a lanyard, and we will escort you out of the building. Please don't return to the building until we've told you it's safe to do so. And also just to remind everybody that the meeting is being live streamed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jill. Welcome, Helen. Continuing the new arrangement which we put in place for July, we asked, and welcome everybody, we asked members to, if they would like to submit up to 2 questions, and you also have a kind of opportunity, if you have submitted a question, for 2 follow-up questions in total. I will try and keep an eye on people who've asked the questions. We've got 30 minutes for this. And Helen, I think you're going to answer the questions in the order in which you've received them. I think there was a late question from Lucy, which I think the Mayor will touch upon. Yeah. So, Helen.
Lovely. So will members read out the question, or will I just go straight to the answers?
I think they're quite short questions. Most of them are quite short questions. So actually, I think people... actually, Anne's question is quite a detailed one, isn't it? I think if we summarise it, and do you want to, if you give a little summary of your question, Anne, that would be helpful. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously I'm unaccustomed to public speaking. My question was about trying to reinstate the 172 bus to go into its old loop around Farrington Gurney, because it's hugely missed, especially by the older people in the community and the less able people in the community, because they can't get to other buses, which is, in its own way is leading to isolation and difficulties getting to hospital appointments, etc. It used to happen some years ago, but for some reason the loop was removed. And when I asked the question previously, there was the funding allocation was not allowed for previous routes. For some reason, you couldn't reinstate a previous route, but I understand that that's been removed now. So please, may I have the 172 back on its route, please? It seems the simplest solution to a huge problem. Yeah, that's about it, really. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anne. Appreciate the question. So I'm aware of the challenges with Farrington Gurney. I've got family that live in the village, right, and 2 nieces that I think are sort of currently about to go into 6th form, and you know, their ability to go to college in Bath, for example, is really hampered by this. So I'm really familiar with this as an issue. So I think it's important that it affects not just, to say, it's not just older people, it's younger people in the village as well. And obviously one of our biggest challenges is around rural services and making sure that they meet the needs of residents. So we have managed to do some good work connecting 5 villages that don't have access to Bath through the 768, which is a Westlink service. But the 172 is a commercial service operated by First Bus. So we will speak to First Bus on your behalf about this particular challenge. We're also, on a more general point, waiting for confirmation from government for the region's bus grant, which we are hoping to get this month or next month, and that will enable us then to do a bit more work around planning our more general approach to how we connect up villages and rural bus services. So that work will be ongoing, and we're also looking at Westlink services, particularly around commuter times and school times, to see what more we can do so that we're getting the right services in the right place at the right time, rather than a kind of higher level approach. So I've asked the bus operations team if they can get in touch with you specifically on the 172 and on those more general points as well. No problem.
Mark Weston, Councillor Weston, your questions, you kind of broke through the 2 maximum questions barrier, but I think we felt it was on the same subject. So I think if you could summarise your questions, please, then Mayor will answer.
Of course. So my questions are on the East Bristol Liberal neighbourhood. Question 1's on potential equalities breaches and priority of lived experience. 2 was on the economic damage and accountability to local business. And the 3rd was on the emergency safety and the displacement of risk. So I can read them all out if you want, but I'm more interested in the response, if that's okay.
Thank you. Who would have thought that Mark might be the one to put in the additional question? Thanks for these questions, and I'll just answer once if that's okay, and then you can use your supplementary if needed. So I am very familiar with the challenges around the EBLN. I spent a lot of time in the neighbourhood in the run-up to my election, meeting with residents, and I know that there's challenges, I think, in terms of the engagement that was done, the consultation, the design, and indeed how it's been implemented. And I think it's important also to say that there are parts of the community that are completely content and completely happy, as far as I'm aware, with what's happened, and there are other parts of the community who really aren't. So my approach is to ask officers here at the Combined Authority to set up a wholly independent review of all elements that I've just described of the scheme. So that will be done by people who do not live in the region. So it will be a completely independent look at this. And then we will look at those recommendations and how they might impact future funding decisions.
Thank you, Chair, through you to the Mayor, if that's right. I'm not quite sure the procedure and protocol on this. Thank you very much. Do you have a timescale in mind for that? Is supplementary number 1, please?
As soon as possible. So we're working out the scope for that literally in the here and now. And so as soon as that's confirmed, I should say we are working with Bristol. So we, both political and officer level, Bristol are aware of this being our approach. So we will work with Bristol as closely as we can. But the important thing is that the voice of the residents are heard in that. So it's important that we have access to the current consultation, the outcome from the current consultation, and then ideally any previous consultation as well, so that we've got that resident voice running through, as well as you say, businesses both in the immediate livable neighbourhood zone, but also those who sit slightly outside, because I think that's a really important point. It's what's the impact, yes, for residents inside, but it's that overspill, which I'm quite concerned about as well.
If I may, very quickly on that, can you also assure me that the voice of the emergency services will also be heard? Because anecdotally, we're hearing about problems about fire engines, police cars, ambulances actually navigating their way through this new labyrinth we've created in East Bristol. Yeah,
that is a really key part for me, is making sure that we've got those the evidence from blue light services about that. As you say, there's quite a lot of anecdotal evidence, but we need to make sure that we've got the real true evidence and that we're speaking directly to the services.
Thank you. Toby, Councillor Wells, your first question is also on livable neighbourhoods.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mayor. So my first question on livable neighbourhoods was not about any specific one, about future ones. So just asking, given the high value for money of well-designed livable neighbourhood schemes, which can deliver significant benefits for public health, air quality and transport connections, will you support their inclusion in the Transport for City Regions programme, which is the next transport investment programme, for those who don't know?
Yeah, so as you say, TCR, as it's now going to be called, is the next iteration of what is currently called CRSTS. And it's really important to note that is a strategic fund which supports the economic growth of our region. So we will be giving priority to what sits in the growth strategy, so the growth zones and the growth sectors that are in the strategy. We have not yet, apart from giving indicative amounts to government that we've shared with government, decided on the process for TCR in terms of what those allocations will be. And obviously we'll be working with the UAs to do that. But what we have pointed out, or what we've submitted so far to government, is around bus prioritisation, suburban rail, mass transit and active travel, alongside continuing to work to improve and fix our roads and our bridges.
Thank you, Mayor. As a supplementary, could I ask then, you mentioned that the TCR will be focused on the growth zones, which for Bristol is kind of mainly Bristol city centre, and then I guess the innovation arc in the north. Does that mean there won't be much focus in TCR on suburban areas of Bristol?
It's not decided yet until we've had those conversations and we've worked out the processes, but the prioritisation will certainly be in those areas you described.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Toby. And do you want to move on to your second question about CRSTS?
Sure. Yeah, so second question on CRSTS. I'm sure we'll all be happy when we don't have to say that anymore. So knowing that our region has an urgent need for improved sustainable transport infrastructure, what steps are you taking here at the combined authority to expedite the approval of the business cases that are coming to the authority, which have already been subject to a lot of scrutiny at the unitary authorities?
So I do agree with you. I think there is an urgent need to make sure that we've got that improved transport infrastructure that we all want to see, and that does, of course, include active travel. And no one is keener than I am to get the West of England moving and to get the transport infrastructure that I think our residents so deserve. And so it is really positive that we've got CRSTS, but then we've got this even bigger settlement for TCR. But we do have a responsibility here at the combined authority as the strategic authority to make sure that we are getting value for money and also to have a look at the impact of delivery. So we need to look at those business case bids and funding through those lenses. And we've got a very highly skilled team here that I've asked to make sure that we do that. So we will continue to do that. I need to make sure that the region is able to thrive, not just at the end of projects, but during projects as well. So that cumulative impact of lots of schemes happening at the same time in a very close proximity is a real challenge. And so the work we're doing here and part of our responsibility here is to make sure that that's done as well as it possibly can, so that residents see the benefit of the outcomes, but they are also not overly disrupted during the process of different works.
Thank you, Mayor. So as a supplementary, I know that the Bristol Council Transport team have put in a lot of work to very carefully phase the schemes and manage and model the impact and understand what how they can effectively carry out all of these schemes in the same time window. And I think there's a paper coming to Bristol's Transport Committee this month on the matter. Is there a lack of trust between the WECA transport team and the Bristol Council Transport team on the matter?
I couldn't answer for Bristol on that, but from the WECA point of view, no, there isn't a lack of trust. We have a duty as a strategic authority to make sure that we are spending our residents' money as well as we possibly can and giving them the best outcomes. So we will continue to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. I think the question which I had is the next one. And my question was about the cross-country train network, which connects Bristol, I think probably 5 other combined mayoral authorities. And they, from Newcastle to Penzance, these trains regularly suffer from a kind of intense overcrowding and a real lack of mobile connectivity. And this is very much kind of connected into the kind of the growth strategy for the region. We live in a very kind of London-centric political environment. This is an opportunity to say, we are, we've got huge investment in HS2 that gets people from Birmingham to London quicker. But what's happening about the kind of the regional connectivity that will be a huge boost, not just for our region, but for the other regions along those railway lines as well. So I'm asking whether you can commit to working with your fellow combined authority mayors to develop a list of agreed actions to improve the cross-country train service and report back on your progress in doing so.
You won't hear me say this very often, I suspect, but I am so thrilled about this question. I had to travel on the cross-country line 5 times last month, and every single time I did, I was either delayed, it was cancelled. You're right, you can't make a phone call, you can't even send a text, let alone do any business on those trains. And they are hot. And it's miserable. So I completely agree. I have had some correspondence in anticipation from the managing director of Cross Country Rail to to let me know when there was going to be potential disruption on the line. But I think the customer experience is incredibly poor. And as somebody prior to this role who was travelling to Manchester and to Leeds for work, I was losing, 6 hours a day of work time because I wasn't able to connect on those trains. So I think you're absolutely right to raise this. I have got an email drafted in my phone, which was probably written in anger, and it's a good job I didn't have the managing director's email on me at the time. But so I've got something ready to go. I'm very happy to do a joint letter. I will reach out to the other mayors to discuss this as well. I had the pleasure, I should say, of sitting with the Secretary of State for Transport on a cross-country train a few weeks ago. And so we have discussed this informally, but I'm also really happy to reach out to government as well.
Thank you very much. I'll save any follow-up questions for a future meeting.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. In the 120 pages of the growth strategy, there are few explicit references to farming and the agricultural sector. Will this strategy allay the concerns of those who fear that, discussions of climate resilience aside, government has little or no interest in the protracted challenges that British farmers have faced over the last decade? Yeah,
no, I wouldn't agree with that. The growth strategy is something that has been welcomed by all leaders across all three unitary authorities as well as here. And I think that is because we've really made a very intentional effort to speak to all our communities across the whole region, including the farming community. So we talk about food production an awful lot in the growth strategy. And in fact, I think when trying to frame who we are as a region, one of the things that I talk about a lot is where we come from. And unlike some of my kind of colleagues, my mayoral colleagues who are coming from regions of sort of post-industrial decline, essentially, our region is born out of food production and our port. And I think that is very, very important to who we are and who we are going forward. So food production is part of the kind of everyday economy sector that we talk about. And we talk about how this region cannot do the things it wants to do in terms of the future economy without that sector. We also talk about nature recovery an awful lot in the growth strategy. And I think we're also mindful of the fact that farming nowadays is not just necessarily food production. And in fact, our farmers are involved with clean energy. They're also involved with the hospitality sector. So the door is open to anyone that wants to come and talk to us about a specific industry or sector. And I'm very happy to do that with the farming community.
Okay, my supplementary, part of the evidence base for the growth strategy explained that due to rain and waterlogged soils, UK farmers lost £1 billion in 2024, which is a 19% drop in their revenue. Do you think there's a risk in the growth strategy that, much like our industrial base in the 1980s, our agricultural sector will be left to wither on the vine?
I think I hopefully have covered that in my previous question, but no, that's not the case at all.
And you have a second question, Tristan?
Yeah, my second one's on the SDS. There's likely to be a symbiotic relationship between the SDS and Joint Local Transport Plan 5. Are you confident that both documents can be finalised and ready for adoption by summer 2029?
So yes is the short answer. So with the SDS, I'll take that first. We've already started to do some preliminary bilaterals between ourselves here at the Combined Authority and the unitary authorities. And we've got a very clear timeline that's been discussed in those bilaterals that moves us towards 2029. So I'm confident about that. In terms of JLT5, so we're still waiting for government to give us exact timelines around that. But what we are working on at the moment is a transport vision, quite a high level document that will set out direction of travel, no pun intended, around transport. And then that will be followed with a more detailed transport strategy. And the intention is that will then feed into the JLT5.
Okay, and my supplementary, given the difficulties Stroud District Council's gone through with the local plan, are officers confident the SDS will be able to deliver major transport improvements without being overly reliant upon central government financing?
Yes, I think that is a challenge. I think the SDS is about how we use our space more effectively, of course, and there are going to be significant challenges in terms of how we work together, and we know that we've not managed to do this twice before, and we absolutely have to get this right this time. But I think if we're already setting out very clearly that transport is key, and that we believe a better transport infrastructure is how we deliver against our growth strategy. So that's where the focus will be.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we received a couple of kind of questions yesterday, sort of late questions from Councillor Hodge.
This morning, actually.
Okay. I spoke briefly with the Mayor. The Mayor is happy to sort of give a brief answer, but also point you to the officers in the later session. Do you want to give a quick summary, Lucy, of your questions?
Yeah, sorry, can you hear me now? Yeah. So the first question was due to related to the budget papers and inflationary pressure on the transport levy. So the levy, which contributes to supported bus services, is clearly unable to keep pace with the increasing costs of providing these services. How is WECA going to solve this gap, and what is going to happen to services in 26-27? While an increased drawdown of the transport levy reserve is anticipated in the committee report, given that we've got surplus cash forecast at Q1 due to stronger than expected Treasury management performance, which has allowed a significant transfer to general reserves, bringing our total in general reserves to actually slightly more than the minimum target at 10.4 rather than 8.7. So we're transferring over £1 million into general reserves. Why couldn't a one-off decision be taken to fund bus services with this extra cash, as many of our supported services face the cliff edge 26-27?
Thank you. As Councillor Thomas said, because this question did come in just this morning, I'm going to refer the detail, I suppose, for later on in the meeting when you have the opportunity to ask it again of transport officers. But there's just a couple of points I will make. Firstly, that the figures you quote, they're just forecasts and they're not materialised as yet. So it wouldn't be prudent for us to be thinking about what to do with money that is only a forecast. And I think a more general point I'd make is that we are trying to, in this kind of I guess this new iteration of the combined authority and relationships, we're trying to look at things longer term and in a more sustainable way. So what I'm not keen to do is just to find one-year solutions that then you talk about a cliff edge that then provides another cliff edge next year. I think it's much better that we continue these conversations that are happening at officer level, which I understand are being quite positive at the moment. And there is a good amount of cooperation that we continue to do that and see where we can get to in terms of the transport levy. But for me, it really does need to be a longer term, more sustainable approach now.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. The second, my second question was just about the the arrangements for the constitutional review. We're pleased to see the monitoring officers from the constituent authorities have been involved, but I just wonder what progress and what technical changes might be anticipated to ensure that the unitary authorities have some clear influence.
Well, as you say, the monitoring officers are involved in that. I can't preempt what will come out of that process, but I think having the monitoring officers there should ensure that you've got UA's influence and that, again, working together, that will be fed back through the normal channels as that progresses.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. That concludes the questions. I wonder whether you wanted, we've got a couple of minutes left. I wonder whether you want to say anything about any of the items on the agenda for the joint meeting. Perhaps something about the growth strategy. We talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
You know about before.
Yeah, sure. So hopefully everyone around the table is familiar with the growth strategy, has seen it in some guise or another. So I think it's quite it's a momentous piece of work. Momentous is a big word, but I'm going to use it. It's a momentous piece of work for us as the combined authority, because not only does it set out where we are looking to see growth over the next 10 years, but I think the way in which the document was written was truly collaborative. And I'd like to thank all the UAs and all officers that have taken part in that, because it was pretty speedy doing that over the course of around 16 weeks over the summer. But what we've ended up with is a document that I think sets out really clearly where we're going, from a place perspective, where our growth zones are for the region, from a a sector perspective where we're looking to see growth both in the future economy, but also really importantly for me, the everyday economy, and the ability that gives us to look at sectors that sometimes are overlooked, but that employ 57% of our residents. And so it is really important that we look at things like the caring economy. We look at, as you pointed out, Tristan, the farming communities, all those different communities that make up this rich and diverse region. But we're also setting ourselves some really clear challenges as well around infrastructure, around the fact that we know we need housing that is more affordable and accessible for people. We know that we need a transport infrastructure that is fit for purpose and that our residents do deserve, because we have not had that before. And we also need to think very carefully about how we upskill residents, both working age currently, but also our young people, so that they can contribute, be a part of this. And it's really about trying to get a growth strategy that benefits all of us. That is key. So it's not just sort of focusing on high level things that don't mean much to people. It's centered right in the heart of our region.
Thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for attending today. Can I have moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting? This item is to approve the minutes. Could I have a proposer, well, any comments on accuracy, and then a proposer and seconder for the accuracy of the minutes, to move the minutes? Propose. So Councillor Blake to propose and Councillor Clark to second. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest under the Localism Act? No. Thank you. We are now on to statements from members of the public. Thank you very much for coming today. We have David Redgewell, Charlie Siret, Phil Collins and Joe Sargent. So Dave Redgewell, you've got 3 minutes maximum speaking time, and we're dealing with the statements and order receipt. So
I think I just want to pick up from the councillor that spoke. We're on a cliff edge with the bus services unless we get the government grant, bus operator grant for the Western Combined Authority in North Somerset. Plus we sort out the transport levy, which is the duty of the unitary authorities to pay WECA, not the other way round. Let's be clear where it lies. Duties on, by law, on Baines, South Gloucestershire, Bristol, and to some degree North Somerset to pay WECA to provide those tendered services. So the way we're set up, we don't have preset powers. So it's very difficult to bring in franchising, because obviously you need to build a precept to run your own bus services. And we don't have those powers. That may come with North Somerset's membership in the next few months as we go through the House of Commons, House of Lords. So it's extremely important. The people out there are very, very worried about cliff edge. Our enhanced quality partnership has no KPIs, which worries me to death. We should not have no way of holding First Group and Stagecoach to account on KPIs. Everything from cleaning to performance to ticketing to things they do using our public money, and it's taxpayers' money. That needs to be resolved, and needs to be resolved quite quickly. I also am concerned about the lack of inspectors, the lack of people out on the ground, physically in yellow coats and orange coats when things start to go wrong. In the days Bristol City Council had people on the ground out on the street. We don't at this authority. You can't fly public transport from desks on a 24-hour service. I think bus stops, we've made no progress on disabled. Yeah, why do we want the mayor to look carefully at Bristol City Council's submissions? Because there's a lot of gaping holes, inequality issues that we've raised with Bristol City Council. So of course we've all asked the mayor to look at it. If your team at Bristol was more into equalities, we'd be much more safe and happy. We've asked Stephen Peacock to go through the equalities issues over again, and we're pleased that's now being looked at by his team. And this is the Transport Authority, not Bristol. So those are the points there. On rail, we welcome again on rail, but when services are cancelled, who is accountable for £35 million of taxpayers' money spent with First Group PLC? Who checks their performance? Who checks their delivery? They run trains for us as far as Salisbury, Worcester, Gloucester, Taunton, Severn Beach, Filton, all funded by the Combined Authorities. Not a single logo on any train or any station this authority has built. So logos badging is something we need to look at very clearly. We need to move away from being a desk-based organisation to a transport authority that functions and that moves moving the bus
30
stops and
seconds.
shelters over to Wecker. But there's a long way to do. I welcome the progress so far, but we're nowhere near the kind of authority like Nexus or Liverpool City region or Greater Manchester, places I work and where I've been the last few weeks. So I urge that, and Drone, I welcome your comments on cross-country trains. I work for them, and the overloading on those trains between the city regions is something that needs certainly sorting out by Secretary of State. Arriva can't do it. They don't have the power to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next statement is from Charlie Sirat.
Hello, thank you. I'm going to speak today on behalf of Reclaim Our, or like with Reclaim Our Buses. We just want to say that we welcome the ambitious transport goals within the recently released growth strategy to transform our bus network, and welcome the commitment to delivering mass transit and integrated ticketing within the West of England. However, we have concerns about the ease with which these goals will be achieved under the current enhanced partnership relationship with First Bus, which I think David's just spoken to quite eloquently, as outlined in our franchising document produced in 2024, which we'll happily share with the committee again. The powers available to the combined authority are significantly more under a franchising scheme than they are with enhanced partnership. With the Bus Services Bill currently undergoing consideration of amendments and the devolution bill potentially passing early next year, the combined authority will soon be more supported than ever before to investigate, with the hope to eventually deliver, a franchising scheme in the West of England. The more energy directed towards increasing Wecker's powers early on, the less energy you'll spend making concessions to First Bus later to deliver the radical and ambitious commitments in the growth strategy. We agree that the West of England residents deserve better transport, which I know the Mayor spoke to as well. And we're encouraged to see Mayor Godwin prioritise system improvements. We hope this vision will be manifest with an investigation into franchising at the earliest opportunity to get the buses we need in the West of England. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Phil Collins.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Phil Collins from the Chew Valley CIC Sustainable Transport Partnership. We've been working hard as a group to maximise the usage of our two West local services, the X91 and the 99. These are providing a lifeline to the Chew Valley, an area that was previously without any timetable bus services. We have an active Facebook group of nearly 600 supporters. We've run major and detailed surveys on the usage of services with nearly 1,000 responses. We're active on social media and also run physical events such as the recent Fun Day on the buses. I'm sure, like other local community groups, we're very well aware that the current funding runs out in March 26. If there is a gap in the running of viable services at that time, we will lose all the trust and buy-in of the public. So we would firstly therefore ask the authority to do everything it can to ensure continuity of funding over that period of time. We'd also like the authority to reassure us that you'll be using qualitative data as well as quantitative data in the assessing of the value of the different West local services. We would also like to ask the authority to make public the qualitative and quantitative criteria that will be used to assess the viability of the services. For example, in addition to, of course, cost per passenger data, will you be looking at the carbon impact of West local services, the social well-being impact of West locals, the impact of West locals on the specific aims of the government for getting people to work and education, to shopping and leisure, and the comparison of the uptake and reliability and delivery of West Link in Chew Valley zone versus other fixed local West local buses, and indeed versus West Link across other zones. The Mayor and Transport officers already have a copy of our report, the Great Big Bus Survey we did some while ago, looking at a lot of rich qualitative and quantitative data. We feel it would be useful if there was a single survey across all West Local and West Link services addressing the key issues above, and it would be asking the general customer satisfaction, and also you'd be able to see this in the round across all the BSIP funded projects. Our group would be happy to help in consulting fashion with the design of such a survey. Thus, in summary, we put this forward as a suggestion to yourselves, together with reiterating the request that your decision criteria are made public. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Joe. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here on behalf of Reclaim Our Buses as well. We don't hide the fact that we are campaigning for franchising, and we're not convinced by any type of enhanced partnership. I don't know who it was, whether it was Karl Marx or Groucho Marx, who said that the definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that is how I see what we call an enhanced partnership. But just to go back to a couple of the questions that I asked, and also I believe it was Councillor Hodge who also raised the issue around the bus levies. It's very concerning that the money from the shortfall, they say the money from the shortfall from the bus levy is coming from WECA and Unitary Authority. So, but we're not clear as to what that money is, and where's it come from, what's it been diverted from, and what's missing out as a result of that bus levy having to be topped up. The other thing, in my other question, where I was referred to the passenger charter, which sounds great as forming part of the enhanced partnership, but how's it going to be enforced? And is it going to be enforced at all? Who has the resources to do that? And yeah, I can see the benefits of a relationship with First Bus, because they've got lots of nice shiny toys. I mean, those lovely green buses that we see going around, I'm extremely envious personally. I sit on the number 3 if I'm lucky enough to get on one, and my bus is definitely not green, definitely not electric. So it's an issue of inequality around the region, and Bristol isn't great, but the stories we hear from the other parts of the region are much worse. There are people who have a bus that used to take them half an hour to get to a destination. Now it takes an hour and a half. That's not sustainable, is it? And we have people who are panicking because when a bridge, which is due for repair, is repaired, which everyone should be shouting and saying, that's brilliant, we've got our bridge fixed, our roads are open again, but it means the people that are currently served by the Y1 and the Y2 will lose that bus. So there are all sorts of issues that I'm not convinced will be fixed by enhanced partnership. So I would really like us to be doing everything we can to get the ball rolling with franchising. And if that does mean ways of getting further funding from our government, then I urge this committee to push the Mayor to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jo, and thank you everybody who's submitted statements today. We've also received, I'm not sure what I said earlier, 10 valid questions which have been published along with the responses on the Combined Authority website. So. We're moving on now to Chair's announcements. Pick up a couple of points. One is that we've got the bus reform briefing has now been booked for Monday the 17th November. There's been a delay on that, but that was because that's needed to be shared with the Unitary Authority leaders first before sharing with Scrutiny members. We also have a budget meeting. An invitation has been set out for that, for the kind of presentation of the initial budget, and invitations have been sent out for January the 12th. And I'm reminded that health and safety training for members is on December the 9th at 11 AM for 90 minutes, and a Teams link has been sent for that. I also want to mention that as part of my kind of linked duties in this role as Chair of Scrutiny, I'm the chair of the kind of national forum of Combined Authority Scrutiny chairs and vice chairs. So if anybody would like anything raised at a national level relating to Combined Authority Scrutiny, then do please get in touch with me. We've been looking at the Standards and Accountability Bill recently, and I'll share the minutes with members of the most recent national forum so you can get a flavour of what's being discussed there. Thank you. So that's Chair's announcements. Moving on to the work plan report. So that is, we should have had, I suppose, any comments really on that. That's been shared with the papers. I've covered some of the items really on the in the chair's updates. So the spatial development strategy we have coming to this meeting, and I met with John Wilkinson a few weeks ago with regards to some of the content of that. We've talked about the bus reform briefing, and we have, yeah, those are the main items as kind of attached in the papers really. So I suppose any comments on that, and we'll be doing some more work to flesh things out in the coming months. I think Toby.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a bit concerned that our ability to do good scrutiny is being hampered by the combined authorities' willingness to engage in the scrutiny process. We have been accused in the past, not by the current mayor, by the previous one, of kind of throwing stones in this meeting. But when we only see papers when they're kind of 99% complete because they're about to be approved, most likely in a few days' time, that's all we can really do. We've, in this section of the scrutiny meeting, the work planning section, we've discussed a number of times topics that we would like to get more into the detail of and scrutinize whilst those topics are under development rather than when they are 99% complete. But we're not getting that level of engagement. On a few topics, we've been offered briefings. Briefings are helpful sometimes, but that's not scrutiny either, really, because again, we're presented with a topic and then that's almost complete, and we don't have any chance to feed into the process. So on topics like bus reform, on topics like the building of the strategy for the TCR, I'm sure other members have other topics as well that we've discussed. We've asked to be involved during the development of policy and strategy, but it's just not happening. What can we do about that?
Could I take any other questions first, and then we can kind of pick up on that and agree any next steps there. Kelvin.
Thank you. Couple of questions. I mean, obviously, I think the work programme will flesh out. There's a hell of a lot of more scrutiny to be done over the growth strategy, for instance, as and when we kind of understand our ability to see progress in those areas. So I see this as a sort of good start, but it's obviously is an iteration, and we need to flesh it out a lot more. In terms of just being part of policy development, I'm less worried about that. I mean, ironically, you know, the leaders, there's a process by which policy is developed in WECA, and the leaders of the authorities, of which, you know, we've got obviously Tony is part of that process. So we'll be involved in the development of policy, and in fact sits on various committees that will do that. So I think there's a route by which the executive function will get on with it, and I think our function primarily is to make sure that those plans are adequate rather than develop. I feel very much like there should be a line drawn between us scrutinising the plans and saying whether we think they're up for it and they're robust enough, and therefore also saying after the event whether they've achieved what they should have achieved, rather than, I think, kind of more involved in the development of it. I think that there's a sort of duty that we have here in holding the mayor and therefore the other authority leaders to account through this process. I think briefings are the right way in some respects, just to bring us up to speed with that development. That's my personal view. I think others may have different views about it.
Thank you, Kelvin. Any other comments about the forward plan? And then I'll David Addison, Councillor Addison.
Yeah, I have to say I do agree with Kelvin on this. This is not a policy development body. It is a scrutiny body which should be ensuring that those policies have been developed correctly. I think if you want to do policy development, it's probably not the right place to do that.
Thank you. Any other comments? Toby, before I'll just take Councillor Hodge. Lucy.
Yes, sorry, I've got several points on the work plan. I agree with Toby actually, and I'm concerned that one example I think is a good example is the TCR. There's the Transport for City Regions work. There's lots of unanswered kind of questions going forward. We've had an introduction to it. It was the second part of our CICS reflection and briefing, which I think was about 6 months.
Sorry, what's CICS?
The TCR, the next stage in the
Okay.
Transport for City Regions funding, and getting clarity from DfT and how all the funding is going to be allocated.
Was that in your executive role?
No, I'm saying it's an example of something that we could do with a detailed briefing about, as an example of something I think that follows on from Toby's queries, rather than seeing the next paper coming forward in the that comes to committee with decisions already made. I think if we're briefed in advance, there's a lot of key decisions on that to be made, and that we could do with detailed briefings ahead of that, so we're not just responding to the paper where, as sorry, Councillor, I can't remember his surname, Toby has said. So I think he's making a valid point on in that respect. I did wonder whether there was something that we, a couple of topics we could have another kind of detailed briefing on, a bit more of a presentation on the Made Smart in Southwest programme and the Spur Up projects. When I was reading the papers, I found it quite difficult to really understand what these projects, these investment projects involved, and I thought they might be something that we could include in the work plan. And I did have I had a third point. It's gone now, of something else we could discuss, but I'll come back to them, I'm sure.
Thank you, Lucy. Councillor Weston, and then back to Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. The danger now is we sort of start chasing our tail a little on this one. For the record, I think I'm probably with Kelvin. We're here to scrutinise. We aren't the body that creates policy that drives that forward. The policy creation is done between the leaders of the council in conjunction with the mayor. So if we're trying to influence policy, then actually we need to influence our own council leaders in those conversations. And we do that by flagging up the concerns of the issues we learn about here and pass them on. And that's how we do it. We are here to scrutinise what comes out before the decision's made. So I don't believe we are policy development. It's actually in our title. We're there to scrutinise. And also, we only have 4 meetings a year. I'm not actually quite sure how we would policy develop with that level of meeting.
Toby, if it's a quick one, rather than getting involved in conversation, and then I'd like to feed back on the range of points that have been made.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a useful conversation to have. And I do agree that our role is very much different to the mayor and the leaders of the councils and any other kind of members who are involved formally. I guess my point is that the scrutiny should be part of the policy development process. Perhaps I should have said it that way, rather than saying that we are developing policy. And I just feel that we're kind of toothless, that because we see things so late in the day, that actually if we do, as we are the check and balance, that's what we should be doing. As we do see things so late, we don't really have much opportunity to actually intervene and course correct. That's my concern.
Thank you. Councillor Bird, just to say to people, Mike's here as an observer, but we very much invited him to take part fully in the meeting.
Thank you. Yeah, just to raise the question really about this group, the Scrutiny Committee's involvement in what will be probably the biggest thing to happen to WECA in the future is that North Somerset's membership. I don't know if people know, but there is no mechanism for a district council to join a unitary authority. So the government are forcing North Somerset to go through as if this is a new authority, and the processes involved in that, which are quite large. And so I just had to point up that perhaps this Scrutiny Committee should have some involvement and looking at the processes involved of bringing North Somerset on board.
Thank you. I mean, what I'm hearing is there is a sort of there's a dialogue around the right balance between policy development and scrutinising. Our title as a committee is overview and scrutiny, and actually, in order to do, my belief is that in order to do our job well, we need to have a much more developed approach to kind of pre-scrutiny, and I think that's really helpful for the organisation as well, because if what we're getting, if where scrutiny is able to input is when the executive in the authority and the mayor are able to say, this is our proposed direction of travel, what do you think of it and how would you like to see it evolve? That is a very legitimate form of scrutiny and a kind of a strategic form of scrutiny. And I'm very committed and to putting the time in to make sure that we are contributing and helping shape in that sort of way, because what it doesn't mean, because it means when you get the final results, you've had early influence in the direction of travel. It's not been easy over the last few months because we've had a new incoming mayor, and it's very much about getting things in place for the next few years to work well. And I think we are, things have settled in a little bit. I understand that with regards to, I mean, CRSCS is a very good example. We need to have input on the overall framework before being presented with a fait accompli of this is what the projects are, what do you think, scrutiny? And I've been talking with the mayor and with Stephen Peacock about making sure that we're inputting, and also with portfolio leads, making sure that we are joined up, because the unitary authorities want that early dialogue as well. So I hope with the spatial development strategy, for example, that's a kind of flavour of incremental levels of input with ability to scrutinise along the way. And I'd like us to be shifting much more towards that. And I very much note Mike's point about making sure that we've got, we're thinking carefully about the sort of North Somerset joining the combined authority. And the other thing which I'm keen to do and kind of talk through a little bit more with Councillor Hodge as Vice Chair is increase the number of, or the opportunity for visits. We found that the visits for the adult skills really useful last year. So if members have any suggestions of what visits they might like to have, recognising the kind of the very limited time we've got, that would be most welcome as well, either here or at a later date. Tim, Councillor Rippington.
Yeah, one thing I'd certainly be interested to see, but I have no idea what sort of position it's in, is the whole Brabazon development and the station that we're putting in there, where the arena is going to go, where all the housing is going to go. I've seen pictures, but it doesn't really give you any idea of the scale of what's being looked at there. So that's something I'd be interested in, but as I say, I don't know how you'd fix that up.
Take that away and consider a possible Brabazon visit. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Mark. We are now, unless there are any other comments on the work planning, we're now going to look at the items going to the joint meeting. But before we do that, I suggest we have a short break because it's it's a big chunky item. And I think if we come back, if we get going again at 25 to, I think realistically, we are on now to the review of items going to the joint meeting of the combined authority and the joint committee. Just in terms of terminology, we're generally referring to these Friday meetings as the joint meeting now, because there is a WECA meeting and then there is a joint committee meeting, which is the meeting with North Somerset. And altogether, we are referring to them as the joint meeting, because increasingly, as the likelihood of North Somerset joining the combined authority increases, then joint meetings are the forum that make most sense. So when I talk about the joint meeting, that's what I'm talking about. That's what we're talking about. We are fortunate enough to have officers to present most of the papers for that meeting, and I've also suggested that some of the finance papers, we got some finance papers at the start of that meeting, and we got some finance papers at the end. So I'm actually trying to kind of bunch all the financy things together. So I will point you to those relevant items on the agenda as they happen. The first item that we've got is the investment fund programme and the grant assurance, and we've got and the delivery assurance, and we've got Pete Davis speaking to that. And so if you join us here, Pete. And if you could remind us when you start what your role is. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm Pete Davis. I'm Head of Grant Management and Assurance at the Combined Authority. Just to talk about the Investment Fund Programme report, this is the regular update on the position of the Investment Fund Programme. There are two recommendations related to the Investment Fund. The first relates to over-programming. There's been significant over-programming in the Investment Fund since the programme was first formulated in 2019. This currently stands at 40 million. This was included because with a programme of this nature, inevitably schemes are either going to fall away or be delayed. We're now in a position where this programme has become much more mature. A lot of the original funding allocations have now translated into awards of funding, and projects are in delivery. So this underspend has now caught up, and we're in a position where the 30 million we receive as annual income and the expenditure need to more closely match. It's therefore proposed to remove the revenue over programming and reduce the capital over programming to 7.5 million, which overall reduces the headroom by some 32 million. In terms of project changes, the programme is regularly reviewed to see if there are opportunities to add funding back into the headroom. Figure 3 in the report identifies 3 such opportunities with swaps or other changes which would add 10 million to the headroom. The other recommendations in the report relate to the administration and spending of 6 new external funding awards, or provisions to manage 2 previous awards. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Any questions for Pete? Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. The first one, and I don't know if Pete's the right person to answer them, or maybe Stephen, but page 32 of the report, talking about the roughly sleeper prevention and recovery grant. I'm just wondering whether we believe that the WECA can provide what's the best way of saying this? Can we make a valuable contribution with the 100k, which would otherwise be going directly to local authorities in the prevention of rough sleeping?
Thanks, Councillor. As the Mayor said, the work that we've identified under this very small grant, in view of the scale of the issue, has been produced in collaboration with unitary authorities, in particular, given the disproportionate volumes concerned with Bristol. And so you'll see there that one of the things we're looking to do is to explore opportunities to not duplicate, but to add value to what's already going on. No one is obviously going to sit here and say that between us, we've got this fixed, and so I certainly believe that government sees there to be an additional convening role for mayoral combined authorities. So this is us responding with Bristol and the other unitary authorities to a call from government, but obviously we don't have a statutory duty, and we would absolutely not wish to step on anyone's toes. But as the mayor has said, this is a collaborative effort with the unitary authorities.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen. And just also a question on the electric vehicle pavement channels grant. Bristol City Council is already carrying out a pilot study, as far as I'm aware, from work on the Transport Committee on cross pavement EV charging. So is this money additional to the money that's being spent on that? Does anybody know?
Do you know who can answer that, Pete?
Take that away. Chair. Yeah, transport officers will be in a position to take that. I mean, the report does mention that under the.
Okay, it's additional. It's additional. We're hearing from Louise. Okay, thank you. Councillor Hodge?
Yes, I just had a question about Green Recovery Fund on behalf of a colleague, that it ends in March 26. And is there any alternative how projects will be funded in the future beyond that time?
Stephen can pick that up.
We will be starting a conversation with the leaders soon about next year's budget process, so we obviously can't preempt that. So that is obviously one of those matters that we'll need to talk to the leaders about, and as well as officers, including your Section 151 officers. So there's nothing to say at this point.
Thank you. Tim?
Apologies, Chair. I did have one more question, but I wasn't sure whether it was on this or not, but it is. Just in Appendix 1, where we set out feasibility studies, I'm also aware that WECA's doing feasibility study on new stations, has been doing for some while. I'm just wondering where that fits within this funding table.
But it might be a question for transport officers as well, is that right?
It could well be, okay. Chair. There certainly is funding identified for rail feasibility within the investment fund programme. It's probably not well described in Appendix 1, but it certainly is there.
Thank you. Any further questions for Pete on the investment fund, and then we'll go on to delivery assurance. Toby.
Thanks. The funding for the zero emissions transport city, the 500k that was received, and then the programme stopped, but we got to keep the money, which is nice. Is there any time bound on the spending of that funding, and will it remain with Bristol, who it was originally allocated to, or will it be redistributed to the other authorities?
Okay. I can certainly pick up the second part of that question. It will be retained by Bristol and repurposed as outlined in the report. I'm not aware of any timescales, but transport officers might be able to confirm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pete, can you go on to delivery assurance? Yeah, thanks.
This report regular update on changes for schemes within the investment fund programme. 33 projects have submitted change requests which fall out of tolerances for delegated decision. These are set out in Appendix 1. These change requests have been reviewed by the Portfolio Review Board, which brings together the Combined Authority and Unitary Authority directors and chief finance officers. And the reports, the changes included in this report are the ones that they've recommended for approval to committee.
Thank you. I've got a comment about the presentation, and it's good to see that detail. When we're looking at the description of the projects being revised, what we're getting is a description of what the change is. But if we were able to have a kind of like a 2-sentence description of what actually the project is, I think it would be really helpful, because at every opportunity, because the kind of the breadth and detail of the authority's activities is so large, just having a little bit of a describer helps people get familiar with what's going on. And I'm seeing some nodding here, so thank you very much. Questions on delivery assurance? I wanted to ask a little bit about the North Keynsham Land Acquisition Fund. If you could tell us what that involves, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, the North Keynsham Land Acquisition Fund. The Land Acquisition Fund was set up some years ago with the notion of enabling the authorities to buy land to support housing development, to give the councils a more controlling role in terms of bringing together land ownerships and necessary infrastructure. There's a site in North Keynsham which was acquired for Baines some years ago with the view to bringing that forward for development, housing development predominantly.
Okay, so it's a housing development site owned by Baines, with the opportunity for houses to be built there.
Exactly that.
BCC has secured UK Shared Prosperity Fund to deliver property grants, and this has been prioritised. Could you tell us a bit about the Shared Prosperity Fund and what that's actually meaning?
I could, but I couldn't tell you the detail related to this project. But the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is an award that the Combined Authority has received, and it dovetails somewhat with the investment fund because it has some shared priorities and uses. So I think in this instance, it's the Bristol City Centre High Streets project, isn't it? I believe they obviously have UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which they're matching in with the investment fund, and I think their notion is that they prioritise the spend of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund because it had a hard deadline, and that has pushed back the spend of the investment fund.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I just say that the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is an update going the other side to Audit Committee to look at the governance arrangements, the risks and the controls in place around the fund.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. So unless there's any other questions on delivery assurance, I think that, Tim?
Just very quickly, Chair, just Portway Park and Ride extension. It's not often that we hear about projects coming in under budget, so just wanted to raise that and congratulate.
Because we're looking at, thank you. Because we're looking at the numbers, I've suggested that James talks us through the mayoral combined authority budget ahead of its item on the agenda while we've got our financy hat on. And also the joint committee budget forecast. If you could also say, James, what your role is when you introduce yourself. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. I'm James Canalian. I'm the head of finance at the West of England Combined Authority. So the first report, which is the regular update to the forecast for the 25-26 financial year. And just in terms of the headlines in there, so revenue spend is currently forecast 2% lower than the current budget, with a predicted total spend of 177.43 million. We have had strong treasury management returns, which have been mentioned already today, and we are currently allocating an additional £1.1 million to be transferred to reserves. Capital expenditure, we're currently forecasting 25 million lower than budgeted at 229 million pounds. That reduction is largely due to delays to the CRSTS and rail programmes. I don't know if anyone had any questions. Yeah, very happy to do that. So the second report, the Joint Committee budget, provides an overview of the latest forecast for Joint Committee for 25-26. In addition to that, there are 4 proposed changes to EDF and RIF programmes, which are in Appendix 4. And then there's also the approval of the drawdown of £24 million worth of EDF funding for Metro West 2. And also a note that there is currently a £32 million funding gap on that scheme. In terms of the highlights on the forecast numbers, so revenue forecast showing a £1.9 million underspend versus current budget. which is primarily due to underspends in the environment area, largely related to social housing decarbonisation fund. The capital forecast is currently showing it £16.8 million below budget, which is due to Metro West 2 and also due to the social housing decarbonisation fund. So that's a summary of both. So if there's any questions on either.
So James, I just wanted to understand this point about the point I made about reserves earlier. I was just asked to take forward that point, and I just want to understand that with the transport levy, it has its own reserve, doesn't it, that you can draw down. And what's the reluctance to use more of that reserve given a kind of pressure at the moment? And also, can you, when you're, if you're forecasting that you'll be able to top up the general reserve, eventually, how is there a possibility to shift between reserves? Or, I mean, I take the point that you want to solve the underlying problem, but given we're in a particular crisis at the moment, can direction be given to have a change of emphasis to kind of mitigate some of the crisis and support bus services?
So there isn't a particular reluctance to use that reserve, and actually by the end of next financial year, it will be completely used up. So that's why there's the potential pressure. I think, as the Mayor said earlier, in terms of what we're doing going forwards, at the moment this is just a forecast. What we decide to do around that is something that we can come back to at another point.
And I think it's important to note that the officers are working together to find a more sustainable solution for this. We're really, really keen not to use one-off fixes, which is what we've been doing in prior years. We need to find a way to find a permanent solution, so it's not masked by one-off solutions, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to know, from like a financial perspective, what are like the kind of key risks and issues from financial outturn performance that are kind of keeping officers awake and worried about, general performance of the finance?
I mean, I suppose the obvious one is going to be the delivery on the capital programs, particularly CRSTS and rail. We've kind of touched on with discussions about reserves. Our core funding position is we don't get very much. We have what's been for the last few years £1 million of actual core funding. It went up to 1.5 million, which, as you can imagine, actually doesn't really go particularly far. So we are really reliant on the Treasury management reserves to keep us on an even footing. And we sort of highlight those as two of the main risks in regular budget papers, and they sit on our risk register as well. I don't know, Solange, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat, but it's our core funding, and they're very well set out in our budget paper that went to the January committee, and it is topping up our reserves. So the only option we really have is Treasury management. So we do need to be quite prudent about having the current availability to use Treasury management and put them to general and earmark reserves now while we have the opportunity.
And Stephen, thank you, Solange, you want to say something as well?
The underlying financial sustainability of the combined authority is a common issue across all Mayoral combined authorities, and we will be doing some work next year to look at the core funding dynamic, because we talked here about Treasury surpluses. Well, if it weren't for those surpluses, we would struggle to satisfy our auditors around certain matters to do with viability. So that's not sustainable. It sends the wrong message. We need to look again at how we fund what are the essential functions without which we couldn't do any of our work. As everybody, well, most people will know, our devolution deal was a flat cash settlement. That's now 8 years old. No inflation has been applied, and that's the same everywhere. And also, it's less than 10% of our actual funding this year. So you can see the world's moved on, but what we've got is this sort of multi-layered series of individual funding deals, which of course is why we need to have an integrated settlement, which is what you get if you're an established authority. That's what this is all about. We need to become more sustainable because it's good for residents and it's good for the viability of the organisation.
Thank you. Any further questions for James. Thank you. So I thought, Bob, also fairly close to kind of the finance is the independent remuneration panel, because then we've just got the chunky strategy items left. So I thought if you could talk to your two items, which are the independent remuneration panel and the amendment to the constitution. Sorry to kind of bob around everybody through the agenda, but I think it just then leaves the more kind of strategic initiatives a bit more kind of space to breathe.
Thank you, Chair. I have two brief items. First is the independent remuneration panel, where we sought to get an allowance or have their views on an allowance for the deputy mayor now that we've appointed a deputy mayor, and that's just recommending a figure for committee to approve so that the deputy mayor can have an allowance. And then on the second issue of the constitution, really it's a very narrow point. Our constitution, which was set really in 2017 and has not been changed. There's a longer piece of work that's coming through. It's already been mentioned by members, and we'll have consideration through the UAs and various other bodies before coming to committee for approval. But there's a specific issue that needs to be addressed, which is electronic sealing of documents for us to be able to move to digital approaches to approving contracts rather than having big hard copy documents going round and being sealed in a rather Victorian manner. So it's just to square off that particular issue.
Thank you very much, Bob. Any questions for Bob on either of those two items? Well, perhaps we'll do with the independent remuneration panel first. Kelvin.
I just want to thank the independent review for doing the work they had to do. I just want to say it is a lot of money for the deputy role, and therefore an expectation, I think, that individual really does act as the deputy, and we get good value for money from the payment of that for that individual. So I just think that the public will demand that level of scrutiny regarding that. I think it's really important that we state it here, and that they act as deputy, and that Helen can rely on that individual to do that, rather than a sort of payment just in addition to that individual's normal roles, because it is quite a large payment.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually very, very nervous about this. I'm actually not sure what the deputy does for that role, because actually previously the mayor has exercised almost total function on this, and the deputy fills in every now and again. This seems quite a large amount of money for what I see as a roughly honorific title, and I'm not sure this is value money in any guise at all. I think what will happen is you'll have a payment that goes out, and I'm not sure any service to the taxpayer or the mayor will actually be accrued for it. I don't see the need for this at all.
Any other questions on the independent remuneration? Yeah, okay. Thank you. I mean, I'm hearing the concerns being expressed about value for money and kind of specifics, really, about what the expected duties are of the deputy mayor. And I kind of quickly checked. I mean, it's about 24,000. Is it for this for this role as a? Oh, okay, all right, 19,000 for this role.
Chair, if you want me to comment, obviously the independent remuneration panel, the purpose of them is to get under those issues and analyse that particular element, and I think it reflected the previous allowance for the deputy mayor that we had with the first mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Randalls, then Councillor Clark.
I just have a question on mechanics, really. So, I mean, as councillors, we have to be, active for 6 months or so in roles. Otherwise, you just get booted off your council and there's an election called, etc. Are there any kind of checks and balances behind this payment in terms of when it may or may not be paid, or is it just it's a flat allowance paid over 12 months and that's it, and that's the end of it?
Should we take Tristan's question as well, and then you can perhaps answer them both together, Bob?
I think it was more just a general point. I say there is a role description to it, but the previous mayor went 4 years acting unconstitutionally by not having a deputy mayor. So I'm just glad we've moved on from that point where somebody in a significant role can just act unconstitutionally for 4 years with little or no consequences.
Thank you.
So the rules that apply to attendance apply to the deputy mayor as well, so to all members. But other than that, there's no formal sort of sanction in that regard. So therefore, it will be a matter of monitoring and liaising between the mayor and the deputy mayor in terms of making sure that the activity is undertaken. So that's the way in which that will be managed.
Thank you. So I'll reflect those items or I'll reflect those comments in my feedback to the joint meeting on Friday. Thank you very much, everybody. Moving on then to the West of England growth strategy and the kind of linked paper preparing for our future. And Jess Lee as okay, and George Marchison. Yeah. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, George. And if you were able to introduce yourselves and your roles, I don't know.
Hi, I'm Jess Lee. I'm Director of Strategy for the Combined Authority.
And I'm George Marchison. I'm the Head of Analysis and Evaluation, Combined Authority.
Could you tell us about how the two, they're separate agenda items, but they're very much linked, aren't they? So if you just give us a...
Shall I do an overview of the first one first and then
okay.
come on to the second one? Does that
lovely.
work?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think as Helen set out earlier, the paper on the growth strategy really represents quite a big step forward for us as a combined authority. The paper covers a number of different documents, the first being the growth strategy itself, and then some of the associated pieces of work that will set the direction of travel for delivering that. So very briefly then, in terms of the growth strategy, it sets out how we want to drive economic growth across the region in a way that will contribute to national economic growth, but also ensure that all our residents are able to benefit. It talks about the key sectors in the West of England where we've been working with government through their industrial strategy to identify where the West of England can really compete on a national and international level. But it also really importantly, as Helen mentioned, talks about how important the everyday economy is to ensuring that the West of England is functioning effectively and is the place that people want to live and work. The document also talks through the wider the conditions that we need to ensure are in place for the success of the wider economy, recognising the diversity of the economic base in the West of England. So that is things like transport and housing and all those other really important elements to support businesses and residents to thrive. The growth strategy also it discharges our responsibility, if you like, to government to produce a local growth plan. So it does what government require us to do or require mayors to do in that regard, and outlines the shared priorities that we've agreed with government, which will provide us with a route to further sort of negotiations and discussions about investment and future devolution on those themes. And I think it's important to say that the strategy sort of sets out an ambition for the region as a whole, and the way that we did the work, as Helen mentioned, to develop it reflects that, in that we work really closely with the unitary authorities and our sort of wider stakeholder group. So it's not just a kind of statement from the mayor or the combined authority, it's a much broader regional ambition. So that's the growth strategy. The other documents that this paper covers are the outcomes framework, which sets out what success will look like, in delivering that growth strategy, and it provides us with a series of sort of measures that will allow us to ensure that our programmes and projects are all designed to enable the delivery of the growth strategy. The next one that it covers is the investment strategy, and similarly that provides us with a framework for making sure that we can deploy our resources in the pursuit of delivering the growth strategy, and also maximise the impact our resources have for residents in the region. And the final thing that paper covers is the Get West of England working plan, and this is what sort of first, I guess, of the almost suite of delivery plans that we'll be developing over the coming months. And it sets out, we've developed in partnership with DWP, and it sets out how we can join up local work, health and skills support to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our residents and our employers. So that's the first paper, and it's rather weighty suite of appendices.
So, any questions for Jess on the growth strategy? I think Toby, you got ahead by a whisker from Mark, and then Tim.
Thanks very much. So I'm glad we've given it a better name than the local growth plan, because that was quite confusing with some other documents produced locally, and it's neither local nor a plan. So yeah, I like the name a lot better. My question is actually in regard to the investment strategy that accompanies it. And what I'm reading in that strategy is a shift by the combined authority more towards delivering directly as an authority from it kind of where it is now, where it's mostly a funding body kind of giving money to local authorities that are then delivering projects on its behalf. Do you think that the combined authority has kind of enough political capacity, and I mean in terms of committees, number of meetings, that kind of thing, to actually make the increased volume of decisions that will come along with that, make sure those decisions are made promptly, make sure they are transparent, they're made in public? Does it have the capacity, or is that tied in with constitutional reform and perhaps changing the way the authority works with its public meetings?
Stephen, you want to answer that?
So really great question. So first of all, to answer the first bit, which is a presumption that we're moving from being a funder to what you might call an enabler or a leader or a convener. And there's a directional shift, because if we don't, we'll be stuck. And the world around us is moving on. So mayoral combined authorities are being seen as conveners, as strategic champions, but they don't operate in isolation. The mayor is not an executive mayor. She operates through a committee. And as you heard from Jess, the document we have before us here is one that was not just signed off, but I think celebrated by each of the committee members. So as for the journey internally that we need to go on, you may have heard about something called the Organisation Improvement Plan. Well, that is the internal driver of the change. So whether that's strengthening our leadership capacity, making frankly a better job of delivery, from beginning to end, being more transparent. As you see, the outcomes framework is an example of where we will be looking at projects and we'll be saying which of the outcomes this project delivers to. It's all in play, and it's absolutely all in pursuit of the prize of established authority status, which we think is sort of a non-negotiable if it comes to getting more investment and delivering more for the residents. So there's an awful lot to do internally. What it isn't is a simplistic kind of we now do everything approach either. So there will be a case-by-case approach we take across the thematic areas, and we understand and will continue to expect local authority partners to play a full part in some areas, and in other areas we may be taking more of a lead role. That's to be confirmed, and it's definitely not dogma. It's what's the right model for the region. So it's a live conversation. It's a good question.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, but I guess you want comments and statements later, do you?
No, I think both are good.
Okay, question, page 74 of the growth strategy talks about unlocking the opportunities of tidal energy. First of all, can I say, I think most of the document, I fully agree. I think it's some really good stuff in there, and I do. But I'm going to do that usual councillor thing and throw stones at a couple of things. So apologies in advance, but I do like most of it. Some of the opportunities of tidal energy. I've been around far too long. This tidal energy unlocking the Severn Estuary seems to appear in almost every growth strategy. It's the second one, number 2. Growth strategy I've ever seen, and yet it just seems to be one we talk about, wheel out and put it in every one, and it never really gets anywhere. It's the action for growth, if you look at that. are we realistically going to do anything on this at all? Because we keep talking about it and nothing has happened.
Do you want to say that one as well?
Sorry, to be blunt.
I mean, so the portfolio of things under clean energy includes tidal, small modular reactors, offshore wind, community energy. I think it's a basket of opportunities, and we'd be silly to ignore one in favour of the others. To answer your question, we need to be in it to win it. And without serious government backing, of course, this next stage of work can't progress. And so partnering with our colleagues across the water, as we are doing, working closely with Cardiff Capital Region and some of the constituent authorities there, as well as talking with Liverpool City Region, we are working together so that we can make the case, so that when government makes a clear policy statement around it, if there is the next stage that can be funded. And I believe that we're talking a very different technical solution to the ones in years gone by. So we're talking about some fairly sensible and deliverable concepts, but they are still early stage business cases. It'll cost tens or hundreds of millions of pounds to get to the final stage before you build anything. That's beyond our ability to pay for. But we want to be in the conversation with government. But there are other winnable fights, shall we say, winnable conversations in other areas of that renewables mix, which we're pursuing with just as much vigor.
If I may then, page 84, the West Innovation Arc, second paragraph, the YTL development has invested, the scheme will provide over 6,500. Forgive me, I actually thought the YTL development on Brabazon could only go up to 6,500 with major transport infrastructure to lift it. It's got approval for 3,750. It can only go to 6.5 if there's 15-minute trains, 8-minute buses, and all the rest of it. And now they're talking about it could go up to 25,000 is one figure that's been pulled out of the sky. Considering the Henbury station is 7 years late, how likely are we to actually provide the major transport infrastructure before we decide to build an entirely new city on the edge of Bristol?
So I think all these things come together, don't they? The ambition for the Brabazon area is part of the wider Western Innovation Arc, and there are a whole range of things that we need to be focused on delivering in order to make that come to life, including the transport infrastructure that's required. But I think the approach that we're trying to take here with the growth strategy, which is to look at it as a place, as one sort of area of the region that needs all these things to come together, is what will enable us to unlock a greater ambition around housing numbers, because it's only when we take a considered approach across all of our levers, including transport and employment space and everything else, that we can come together to ensure that the scale of the ambition is realised. But clearly there is a whole programme of work in here that would need to be delivered in order to realise the ambition in Brabazon. But that's what we're focused on trying to do. And it's worth saying it's a 10-year strategy, so this is not all to be delivered within the next year or so. But it's about being ambitious, isn't it? And about looking to seek to get the numbers of houses that we need for our residents to be able to have the lives that we want them to.
Yeah, I suppose we could define what I think foolhardy and ambitious is with 25,000 homes in Brabazon. But anyway, ambition I like. Page 62 talks about improving the suburban rail network. And it mentions Porter's headline, and you mentioned rail throughout the document. There's actually no mention of the Henbury Loop on this, despite the fact that 2 of the growth zones actually sit on a railway line that connects each other. Now, since on page, let me get my file, since on page 74, we talk about working with the port for offshore wind, shouldn't ambition be working with the port in order to deliver the Henbury Loop? Because actually we talk about mass transit and rail, but we never talk about the ambition of the Henbury Loop in this document.
Well, we will be coming back to all of these issues when we look at our transport vision and our transport strategy. And as I know you only know too well, that Henbury Loop is a slightly complex one and probably quite expensive. But we will be looking at it as part of our overall delivery planning, because there is a transport impediment to all of this. The area that, broadly speaking, is that part South Gloucestershire across to Avonmouth. There's huge potential, both economic, housing, and visitor economy, but it's obviously held back by a lack of infrastructure. So our strategy really is deliver, tell the story, and then go back for more investment once you've wisely invested the first tranche. So it's definitely in the list of projects, Henbury Loop, but it's something we'll have to come back to in the course of next year.
Okay. I promise this is my final comment. Delighted to hear it. I'm delighted you're going to be coming back to it. I can assure you I'll be coming back to the Henbury Loop repeatedly, to the point that my colleagues will probably throw heavy objects at me in the end of this. Does that someone said yes? Okay, anyway. Okay, thank you. When it comes to things like the Henbury Loop, and it is a complex project, but I do think if we are working with the port to deliver on their aims of offshore wind, then they can work with us when it comes to delivering our aim on rail. I think this needs to be a symbiotic relationship where sometimes it can feel a little one-sided. And that's my final comment, and I'll shut up.
So just on that point, though, I think that's absolutely right. And I think there is a real, I mean, not necessarily on that one specifically, but broadly, this is about having a clear set of objectives that we're trying to achieve together across the region, and all our partners having elements to play across that suite of objectives, and having it written down and signed up to, and something we can point to. I think is really helpful in that regard, because it allows us to have those conversations, doesn't it, about, you know, how we all play into those wider suite of ambitions.
Thank you. I'll just take a note of who else wants to speak. So Kelvin, Tim, Tristan, and anybody else. So that I want to just also be moving towards closure on this. I've got a few comments as well. Okay, so in that order.
First of all, I really welcome the strategy. I think it makes a lot of sense. Like Mark, you know, I sort of agree with 99% of it. One thing for me is understanding the big push is going to be getting the economically kind of inactive, active, and my worry about this is where, I mean, you're highlighting a couple of areas around empowering residents with the skills to access jobs and lifting children out of poverty and families, but a lot of the focus is on innovation and high-end skill development. I just wonder where, and that's really important, right? But where do we get that point of getting the economically inactive active in this strategy?
Respond to that. So I think that there are a number of different routes into that. Part of it is about ensuring that the everyday economy being one significant employer within the region. I think it's, what is it, George, 57% of employment across the region, and ensuring that we are working with that sector of the economy to identify what are the skills that are required that won't necessarily be, you know, the sort of high-end skills as you say, you know, that you might need in innovation and advanced manufacturing or whatever. But we need to ensure we have that pipeline of available, you know, residents with the right skills and ability to be able to support the development of that sector of the economy. But I think more widely, as you say, a lot of the emphasis in here is about enabling people to be able to participate, and that might be about ensuring we've got the transport routes right, or it might be about ensuring that we've got clear pathways into the different potential job opportunities across sectors of the economy that exist across the region, and making sure that we're working with our partners in the further education providers and the unitary authorities and everywhere else to make sure that all our levers are lined up in support of that sort of objective.
Thank you. James Rippington.
Yeah, thank you. Just picking up on Mark's theme of things that we've talked about for an awful long time. I'm really pleased to see that mass transit takes such a key focus within this document. I've been to a couple of places recently. Amsterdam, which has got a truly tremendous metro system, just 3 or 4 lines, very simple, runs every 7 minutes, and the usage of that is incredible. Obviously, Amsterdam's a bigger city than ours, but runs underground in the middle and then comes up overground in the outskirts, which is similar to what we were looking at. And Pisa, a much smaller city of about 100,000, which has just got a brand new mass transit system to its airport, you know, which is sort of revolutionary when you see the kind of transport that we have from our airport into the city at the moment. So to have that as such a primary focus here is great. I really just hope that politicians of all colours across all the regions will get behind finally delivering something that our our region needs in this case. The one thing I noticed that's not in the document, and this may be deliberate, is there's no talk of a transport authority for a role for WECA to be playing. And it may be that you've deliberately left that out, or it may be that it's not an ambition. I'm wondering which of those two it is.
On the former, of course, thank you. And we agree, we just need to crack through some work on mass transit. And we've just, I think, appointed a head of mass transit, I believe. So that's good news. We've got somebody to do it. On the point about structures and the point about transport authorities, etc. This document is probably worth saying is not just for us. This document is hopefully an attempt to describe a region's ambition. So we've gone light on internal structures. So we think on the transport front, the work we do and the progress we make will probably help us work out when and if it might be appropriate to look at different structures. As you know, there are other parts of the country have those. Most of them were set up, I think, in the 70s or 80s. So it's been a long time probably since anyone did one quite like that recently. But it's definitely one to watch, and Emma and I are well aware of that it might have a part in our future, but it will depend, I think, on how successful we are in realising our transport ambitions.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Clark.
Thank you. I welcome the Mayor's reassurances earlier with regard to the agricultural sector. I'm still slightly worried insofar as I think it's quite hard for farmers and our agricultural sector to compete with the narratives of other sectors in the economy. When you're talking about small modular reactors or advanced manufacturing, it's a lot harder for them to get heard. A lot of our farms are having to diversify, not out of greed, but out of necessity. So my question is, can our agriculture sector generally compete for potential funding with the sectors that have featured prominently throughout this growth strategy?
So I think that, as Helen said, I think that what we've got in here is a series of sectors that government have recognised as being kind of the areas where we can support international growth. But really importantly, we haven't only focused on that here because we want this to be a strategy for the region and that the region can see itself in. And that's why there is this emphasis on the everyday economy there. And food production is a really key part of that. And I think there's a theme in here around sort of resilience and where, again, food production comes in as a really important element of it. So I don't think it's necessarily about competing, because it's a different sort of story, isn't it? What we're saying about agriculture in the region is about making sure that we are able to sustain ourselves and that we've got a place where we are able to thrive, rather than some of the kind of competing nationally and internationally arguments that you might have for some of those specific sectors that have been identified by government. So I think we just need to look at it as not being in the same competition. It's a different sort of emphasis. And I think through here, there's the growth zone around Midsummer Norton and a lot of the stuff in North Somerset as well that is absolutely embedded in the rural economy. So I think it's worth kind of not trying to see it as being in competition with advanced manufacturing or whatever. It's a different sort of the role that sector plays is different for the region, isn't it?
Thank you. I wanted to pick up a couple of comments, then we'll need to move on. I think to my mind, this feels like a really good, really high quality piece of work. It's exhaustive and it's comprehensive, and I think it will really do the job central government wants it to do. I've got a slight fear that, like Joint Local Transport Plan 4, which is probably a 600-page document, if you go back and look at that exhaustive and comprehensive analysis, it bears very little reality to what's actually tracked through. And I think how we're able to shift from being an organisation that produces really, really good reports to one that is actually an effective delivery organisation is the thing which I would pick up. And I think that's about having a manageable number of objectives, working really hard to decide what we're not going to do. We can't do everything, and establishing what the must-win battles are, so that it's that shift to being delivered. So I see this as a living document where we're coming back to it and we're saying, how useful is this in practice to be able to act as the kind of growth for kind of sustainable prosperity that we need. I'd make a couple of minor points. I think that the degree to which transport congestion and excessive housing costs, those act as major brakes on the sort of the welfare of our residents and the long-term economic opportunities for the region. So that means that house building is such a crucial part of our future growth strategy. And as an example, the must-win battle, going to the adult skills centres, they haven't got enough electrician tutors because you need to pay them £70,000 a year because that's what they get on the tools. And we are not acting on those sorts of breaks effectively enough. So we need to be really in the detail, really focused on delivery. And that links into Kelvin's point about making sure that people are being given the opportunities that they need to participate in a successful economy. So, I think great piece of work, but let's make sure it's usable and let's make sure that it's a fabulous tool for delivery, which is a bit of a different skill set from getting that comprehensive report in the first place. Thank you. And then I think you're onto is the preparing for our future.
Yep, that's me too.
Yeah.
Fine, let's move on to that one. So the Preparing for the Future paper brings together sort of updates on quite a broad series of work streams that we've got underway at the moment. And I think the sort of theme here is about leaving behind the challenges that we have faced in the past and really making sure we're on a strong footing to deliver on the growth strategy, but for our residents essentially. So just in headline terms, the range of things that we've got here, this paper sets out the ambition to progress towards established status, which Stephen mentioned earlier, which is the highest tier of combined authority status and what would unlock for us an integrated settlement, which would give us much more flexibility over funding that's available to us. It sets out a range of pieces of work that are underway to prepare for the potential expansion of the combined authority into North Somerset, should that be the decision that is taken. And some of those are specifics around planning and housing, but more broadly the kind of ambition to ensure that we've got the work, we know what we need to do to bring them in when the time is right. It sets out the establishment of the new business board, which replaces the local enterprise partnership and will ensure that we've got a really strong voice of business as we are developing work. It sets out progress report on the review of the advisory board structure, which will make sure that our advisory boards have a really clear focus. I think it comes back to one of the points that was raised earlier about input into policy making, doesn't it, and how that works. And it's also in response to one of the recommendations from the BVN Independent Advisory Panel. And then finally, it sets out an update on the work on the organisation improvement plan, which Stephen mentioned earlier, and a high-level progress report from the chair of the Independent Improvement Panel, who they undertook a panel review exercise in September. So it's got the kind of headlines from that in there as well.
Any questions for Jess on that, on the preparing for our future? Toby.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and just to clarify on my points earlier, I don't necessarily see the shift of this organisation to being delivery focused as being a bad thing. I just want to make sure that the structure around that evolves in the right way to be able to manage it. So my question is related to that. So I'm glad to see that the constitutional reform and the review is happening. Will the authority be engaging with the public, in particular some of the campaign groups and organisations that are here today, about the parts of the constitution that relate to public engagement? And B, will the authority be engaging with Scrutiny about the parts of the constitution that are related to scrutiny?
I might ask Bob to comment on the constitutional review.
Yes, so the audit committee is the committee that has the sort of the overview of the constitution, and working groups going to be set up to engage with the with audit in order to make sure that there's proper feedback from members in that regard. If this committee wants to have a briefing, then we're happy to set that up for the committee to receive a presentation on where it's going and then provide any feedback should you wish to give it.
Thank you. We might well take you up on that, Bob. Thank you.
What about the engagement with the public?
So the the deputy monitoring officer is taking that forward, so there will be engagement through all the unitary authorities and with members. And I'll speak to the deputy monitoring officer and ensure that there is an opportunity for public engagement and comments to come back as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jesse. Just George, lovely. So, John, you're going to talk about the spatial development strategy. Hi. You can introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself, John. And I think because we've got kind of no more than 30 minutes left, and we had a really interesting session last time on the spatial development strategy, we'll try and keep this fairly brief today. Thanks very much.
Great morning, everybody. I think we're still morning, aren't we? No, afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Wilkinson. I'm the Director of Place at the West of England Combined Authority. Chair, as you said, we had a paper at the last committee meeting which set the spatial development strategy going. And just as a reminder, although I know everyone will remember this, this is essentially a 30-year land use programme that the government has asked us to produce by the end of this Parliament, so by 2029. Since the paper at the last committee, we have begun the process to kick the spatial development strategy off. And this paper sets out what we've done since that last committee meeting and the process that we've put in place going forward from now. It kicks off by reminding us why we're doing this. And that's not just because it's a technical exercise that government has asked us to do, even though that is an important part of this, but actually it's an important part of getting to grips with the huge challenges that the region faces in relation to housing 2,000 children living in managed homelessness, 25,000 families on the waiting list for some sort of social housing. So really significant challenges that the spatial development strategy is going to get to grips with. Since the last meeting, we've held bilateral meetings between the Mayor and the leaders and the chief executives of Bath and North East Somerset Council, Bristol City Council and South Gloucestershire Council. And we have the meeting this week with North Somerset. And those were really the meetings to kick off the principles and to get out on the table early on in the process what some of the tricky issues might be, so that we do this in a proper way that is coordinated with the local authorities, but goes deeper than just a conversation. Actually, it's a collective effort. Those meetings have been really positive, I'm pleased to say, and have enabled us to bring this paper back to the committee, which sets out a series of joint and agreed principles for how we plan to work together. It sets out some proposed governance to make sure that we are at all levels working on this jointly, and you'll see in the paper that there are 3 layers of political engagement that we propose to put in place, and a timetable for the next steps. So the next steps from now until the next summer set out in the paper will be us starting to commission some evidence where it's needed, but building on the evidence that's already been gathered for the local plan processes that are currently underway, establish that governance and start initial stakeholder conversations. We also will need to establish the strategic planning board, and this relates to the previous item that you just briefly discussed around North Somerset. So we need to wait for the planning and infrastructure bill to go through Parliament, which we're anticipating will be early next year, which will give us the ability to set up the strategic planning board to bring North Somerset in as part of the overall SDS process. The government have written to us previously to say they expect North Somerset to be fully involved in the SDS process. So this paper also mentions that as well. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, John. Councillor Weston, Mark.
Sorry, I keep popping up, I do apologise. Looking at the timetable you've drafted, you have stage 4, examination public following submission to planning inspectorate. When in 2028 would you anticipate it going to the planning inspectorate? And the reason I'm asking that is obviously there's the election for the mayor in May 28. So if it's afterwards, you risk a new mayor coming in. It's 29, have I got it wrong? Oh, in that case, I withdraw my question. I'm being a daft.
Thank you. Yeah, I think as the broad principles as a starting point, they're to be welcomed. Obviously, we can't prejudge where it's going to go from here, and we all know the Gordian knot is unmet housing need. But in terms of risks, I suppose my question is, we all hope the unitaries get their local plans through public examination adopted, but is there a risk that one or more unitaries could actually struggle with their local plans like Stroud currently is, and that could have a knock-on effect for delivery of the SDS?
It is a horribly complicated process doing this. It's not just the local plans, it's also, obviously, we have local elections all the way through this process as well. So we're going to have to manage those risks extremely carefully. And the timetable has been put together to try, as far as is possible, to mitigate those risks. We will need to continue with the SDS process, even if those local plans aren't found to be sound. The government expects us to have an SDS in place. Once we have an SDS in place, the local plans will be expected to be in accordance with the SDS. So essentially, we start the process again.
Thank you. Mike. Oh, sorry, David, sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I take your point, but I'd like to work on further about the local plans, because the local plans will be ideally, only South Gloucester's case, approved sometime next year. Are you suggesting that once the SDS is developed, we should go back and reopen those, or are you planning the SDS to be aligned with the local plans?
Yeah, so the rules of the game, as far as we have them so far, is that once an SDS is in place, future iterations of the local plan will need to be in alignment with, considered as, alongside the spatial development strategy. So they will need to be aligned in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Yes, this is probably minutiae to some. Has there been any conversation, or will there be any conversation between combined authority and communities that are currently working on their neighbourhood plans? Because I'm aware that in Pilling in Severn Beach, they're currently working on their own neighbourhood plan, and they're quite worried about the impact in Avonmouth Sevenside. And yeah, so that's quite a hot topic issue for them. So I was just wondering whether there will be sort of outreach to towns and parishes where neighbourhood plans are currently in development.
So it's a good question. It's one of the things that we have spoken to the leaders about in the bilateral meetings that we had. And I think when you look at if you look at the governance charts under section 14, one of the things that we're proposing is to use the forums, to build on the forums that the local authorities have put in place for the development of their local plans, which do tend to reach out into local communities and neighbourhoods. So I think we're keen, because there are so many forums and conversations going on, to build from what has worked in terms of local engagement for those local plans. So at the moment, that would be what we would build from, rather than setting up an entirely new set of conversations, which actually I think could be quite confusing. So keen to keep those in line with what's worked through the local plan process.
Thank you. I would make the observation, I mean, I heard summer as a sort of next date, really. I think there's a danger that if we're not getting the kind of routine reporting on some of those kind of high level areas of risk and opportunity, if we know there's conflicts brewing between the unitary authorities and the regional authority, because this house number does not match with what we know the need to be, having those escalated soon, rather than saying, oh, well, let's think about it in September 26. We absolutely have to have that route, or the authority has to have that kind of early warning systems and those sorts of tensions being addressed in a timely fashion.
Yeah, apologies. I didn't mean that we wouldn't be coming back until summer. That was just the sort of main programmes that we will be putting in place. I hope and expect that you'll see quite a lot of me through this process.
Thanks very much, John. And we're into the last 20 minutes. And Emma, I think you're going to talk us through transport delivery. You could introduce yourself.
Yeah, we'll do. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emma Blackham. I'm the Executive Director for Transport at the Combined Authority.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Salmon, Head of Transport Programmes at the Combined Authority.
I'm Lou McBride. I'm the Head of Transport Strategy at the Combined Authority.
Happy if I just kick off, Chair. Thank you. So I'm here to outline the transport delivery paper for you this afternoon. And I could tell by some of the conversation earlier, this is not your first exposure to the world of CRSTS and outcoming TCR. So I'll try my hardest not to use the acronyms and stumble over them, but bear with. So the report really seeks to do three things. It starts with an overview of where we are with the CRSTS programme. It aims to set out what the TCR programme going forward looks like and the funding that's available through that process. It tries to deal with the overlap and the change of government guidance that's been emerging, that's come through that process as well. Largely changes to what I gather you appreciate from previous briefings was a very hard finish of the CRSTS programme, completing by March 27. That's a softening in the guidance now, with that now coming back as being contractually committed by that point in time. So it essentially extends the programme. The report goes through some of the implications of that and what that means for the committed programme to date, which we deliberately overcommitted or over-programmed to ensure the delivery of the spend by March 27 and the financial implications of that of TCR. So in just running order of where we go through, the committee will be being asked to approve the proposed funding allocations that are set out in the report. Recommendation 2 then goes through some of the detailed recommendations that we would like to ask for to ensure consistency between the city region sustainable transport settlement delegations that exist and applying those to TCR so that we can continue to manage the programme as per the existing recommendations. It asks for approval for some of the principles within which we'll continue to deliver the programme going forward. It asks for delegated authority to basically confirm what those funding allocations means in terms of a rebaselining process with all of the 4 organisations that are funded through this programme, and to submit a change request to the Department for Transport in due course to cover that off. Moving on to the TCR programme, we are asking for a delegation to officers to enable the approval and submission of the TCR plan to meet the government guidance. And also this report seeks to recognise that we haven't to date been sat around doing a lot of work on future pipelines. So a delegation for the CRSTS Capacity and Capability Fund to enable us to begin working on the TCR projects as soon as is possible. The latter part of the report deals with the specifics of the Metro West Phase 2 project and the full business case. Mark is already smiling at me. And what that means in terms of the full business case approval at the committee, but also then in terms of the drawdown of specific funding that's pre-approved and some revenue funding for services. And then finally, the last recommendation is around agreeing an approach to funding as set out in the exempt appendix. So I'll stop there and I'll take any questions.
Tim, and then Mark, then Toby. And Lucy.
Yeah, thanks very much. I know what you said about future pipeline stuff. One thing that I haven't seen anywhere, unless I've missed it in the document, is talk of Metro West Phase 3. Now, obviously, a lot of what's being delivered in TCR is the result of having had a Metro West Phase 2, even though we didn't have the money to do it. So we've now got the money to deliver Metro West Phase 2. So I would hope that we would be looking at putting some money aside to start deciding what might be involved in Metro West Phase 3, but I haven't seen any mention of it in here.
Thank you. I think we'll take a few questions and then perhaps answer them. Mark?
Thank you. Actually, I think we secured most of the funding for Metro West Phase 2 some years ago, but we could split semantics on that. Questions? Obviously, I was going to go on Metro West Phase 3 and, you know, the beloved Henbury Loop, which I'm sure you'd come up on. All right. One of the questions for me was just that, and when we're talking about the growth strategy earlier on, again, when we're talking about growth on the Brabazon airfield, it talks, in order to hit the 6,500, let alone 10 or 25,000, there's an awful lot of rail commitments that were built into that in order to unlock the higher housing targets. Is there the funding secured for that level of uplift in rail provision anywhere? So I'd like to know that, because obviously I'm concerned that we'll start planning and building the houses and yet we won't have the money for the improved rail service, even though one is conditioned on the other. That's my question. Thank you.
Those two questions and then move on to Toby and Lucy's.
Yeah, that's fine. Just before I forget those two questions, that's very helpful. Now, TCR and the Phase 3 of Metro West, it isn't explicitly referenced in the report that there will be a Metro West Phase 3 funded from TCR. What we are clear on is that of the high level allocations that we've been talking around through the TCR programme, very much focused around a bucket of things called rail, a bucket of things called mass transit, and a bucket of things called bus. So to say that we'd worked out the exact detail of what that looks like for the TCR funding period, we're not quite there yet with the detail. But one of the reasons that we want to look at drawing down some of that development funding is so that we can be really prepared with more than we can fund in future allocations. So very much rail is a key part of the programme going forward. So if I move on to the second part of the question, which I think I heard as, have we funded in the programme that we're considering at the committee on Friday 4 services an hour, which is an enhanced level of frequency on the Henbury line. That's not included in the original Metro West Phase 2 business case. That is a lower frequency of services, but absolutely very much we are through looking at what the TCR programme is, looking at how we can fund enhanced services on that line to support the existing growth 6,500, but also the West Innovation Arc allocation or aspiration.
Toby.
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 questions, kind of one on each part of the paper. But don't hesitate to come back to me if you forget where I started. So on CRSTS, I just want to be clear about the kind of rephasing and rebaselining that's happening. So it's good that there's now this kind of blurry edge to the funding and that we can phase it in with TCR. That's great to hear. The list of schemes that have gone into the over programming, will they still be delivered? It's obviously subject to business case, but they're still planned to be delivered either through the remainder of the CRSTS or the beginning of TCR. That's question 1. Second question is about this, about TCR itself. So the document that seems to be known now as the local delivery plan, is that this deliverable we've been talking about for a while that we weren't quite sure what the government wanted? What's your, maybe you could just speak about what the process is for creating that and getting into the more detail of what does bus stuff mean, what does mass transit mean, and what does rail stuff mean? And particularly, at what point will you be seeking political input from the portfolio holders, in particular at each of the authorities? That's question 2. And then the question 3 on the Metro West, there was an exempt paper, which I think is quite important to help understand what's happening with Metro West. Scrutiny members haven't got access to that paper, so could we please be provided with that at some point in the near future? Thanks.
There's quite a few questions, so I think we take those.
Is that okay? Thank you.
We've got 10 minutes left, so.
Okay, I'll be as quick as I can be.
Pick up outside of the meeting.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So, starting on your first question, which I interpret as succinctly as I can to be, are we continuing to deliver all the schemes in the over-programming list? So there is a commitment in the paper that nothing is coming out of the either over-programming or core list, so everything remains in the programme. It is clear in the paper that there is not enough allocation being recommended going forward to cover the full anticipated final cost of everything in the programme. And that is one of the things, because of the stage of where we are in the developing of the programme. As we get towards full business case, we'll have more confirmation of what those costs really are, what the deliverability issues of each of those particular programmes is. So there is no intention to remove anything at this stage from the programme from a combined authority perspective. As we work through the delivery of what that programme looks like within those principles that we're asking for approval of, there may be some value engineering scope changes, but that's definitely something that we'll be working with our union authority colleagues on, because we'll be delivering their programmes. In terms of the plan moving forward for developing the list of schemes for TCR, we have started to have a couple of workshops already to date with the lead members in developing that programme, and we are looking at how we can move forward in the development both at officer level and politically. I don't believe that we have any dates prescribed at this point in time. It's quite a movable feast, but our absolute intention is to continue to work in the collaborative way in which we have been working on both CRSTS, but also on the TCR. It will apply to both. Then there was a question about the exempt appendix, which I'm going to look to Bob to provide some advice on, hopefully.
Chair, clearly it's not appropriate to share that in public session. So if members want to discuss that, we would need to go into a into exempt session.
I didn't necessarily want to go into a session to discuss it, but we don't have access to the paper, so it just after the meeting, if that could be provided.
Yes, it can be, and I mean it's linked to sort of some.
No, so it's
sorry.
So it's a confidential item, and the information that you see from the committee is commercially sensitive, so it will be shared on the basis of a need to know for those members. So the committee members will have access to that and will be able to see it in order to make their decision. But until such time as it becomes non-commercially sensitive, then wider distribution will obviously be limited in the normal course of events.
I would argue that in order to properly scrutinise it, that we need to know what information is in that report.
I have had a detailed conversation about this with Stephen. I think let's and with Bob, let's pick up the detail outside of the meeting. It should be reasonably straightforward to work a way through in a way which gives members comfort around what is in this particular document. So
Chair, I think that's right. We should be able to give you sufficient information to be able to satisfy you that the appropriateness of it, etc., so that you can scrutinise in a proper way.
So anybody who would like this after the meeting, just kind of come and see myself, Bob and Stephen. I think it's the easiest way to handle it. Lucy.
Yes, thank you. I think some of my questions have been answered in terms of a bit more clarity on the plan for the list of schemes, the TCR schemes from the unitaries, how you're going to evaluate them for going forward. I just wanted to understand the buckets and the table that has the sum sort of left to commit. So started with 752, but once we've got the top slice for the maintenance block and the carryover for CRSTS, and the revenue sum, those buckets are they reduced in size, and how will they how will that distribution then be, or is it still that proportionally between mass transit and bus and rail? And I'm also kind of sensing that the rail is already accounted for with Bristol Rail, which is slightly worrying, and I would like some reassurance on that.
So the table 6 sets out the total funding allocation for the West of England at 752. You rightly comment that the top size for the integrated transport block and the maintenance stuff, which is automatically passported back to the unitary authorities to undertake their work, there is an allocation of £59 million of revenue, so that comes out of the running total. The carryover figure from CRSTS is that we've been talking about in the earlier part of the paper. So if that is approved at committee, then that does bring down the available funding to commit to the 392.22 million. I think it's fair to say that there is no exact science or formula behind the buckets that would be applied to that figure. I think it's very much a case of us using the opportunity to do two things: to one, get on and really deliver some good stuff in those buckets, but also to use some of the revenue funding and the capacity funding that we've got to be able to work up more than we can deliver. So I don't think it's a case of saying that the rail element is committed with Bristol schemes. What I would say is that we've got a 10-year rail delivery plan. We've got work that's looking at additionalities across the board, and I think we could more than spend the 392.22 in total on rail 3 times over if that's what the committee ultimately chose to do. But I do think that there's an opportunity for us to make sure that we're looking at the rail bucket in the round, so to speak.
Thank you. And from my understanding, there are expectations from government that we're going to be going back to them by December, I think you were saying, Stephen, with an indication of what's in these different category buckets. Is that the level of detail which government is expecting by December? Is my kind of first question. And then there's obviously a dependency then, because we haven't got our next scrutiny meeting until January, for scrutiny to be able to, well, I mean, it's a combination of both making absolutely sure that the combined authority is joined at the hip with the unitary authority portfolio leads, and that scrutiny has had a chance to sort of pre-scrutinise what's in these buckets. I mean, I'm nervous, for example, that when talking about the buckets, active travel isn't one of them, and we know that active travel has got huge value for money benefits on both, you know, kind of congestion and carbon savings. So a few questions bundled in there, but really about making sure the right people are involved at the right stage, and at what level of detail you're talking to government about this in December.
So I'll start with the level of detail, and I think it's still quite unknown. Okay. We're talking about a high level indicative delivery plan. What that really means in practice, no doubt there will be some kind of spreadsheet that comes out in due course that we will be asked to fill out, but we haven't got the final guidance on that yet. What I would say is it is my expectation, and in conversations that we've had with the Department for Transport, they're interested in high level, and that's as far as that they've gone at that point. In terms of the timescales, obviously, we are driven by the government guidance on that. We have and will be putting more of a plan together about how we engage with the right people along the way as part of the officer delegated decision on that. And obviously, we'll take into account the scrutiny dates as we're building that up.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's concluding the meeting. And I think, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to all the officers who've attended and the preparation work that's been done for this meeting. Much appreciated. And if anybody wants to talk with Bob and Stephen about access to the exempt item, then do please come and see us.
Thank you, Chair.